This evening, apparently, she will be talking about the book. It is the book. The book relates her story. It's set against the background of the decline and fall into apostasy of the Catholic Church in Canada. They're in no better shape than we are. And it tells her story as a Catholic traditionalist activist, an ardent public promoter of Our Lady of Fatima and the Holy Rosary, a spiritual daughter of Blessed Padre Pio, a sister in the Third Order of St. Francis, a pro-life advocate of homeschooling, a staunch defender of the Latin Tridentine Mass, and a public foe of sex education in the schools, heretical catechetics, and pornography. I know you're going to be much edified by hearing Anne speak to us tonight. Please come to the podium. Please, audience, welcome to the podium Anne McGinn Cillis.
Thank you very much, Gary. I appreciate that introduction. And I'm very happy to be here. I have often wanted to come down and see the St. Benedict Center, and there was always something coming up that I had to look after. If you saw me being helped up those stairs, that was very kind of Doug, because I've flown from Ottawa last night with my very dear friend, Sister Aldine Monroe, who's the Sister of Holy Cross. And I flew from a convalescent hospital where I presently am residing, shall we say roosting, and I have to return there. I'm going to stay an extra couple of days and visit the St. Benedict Center. And I have to go back to this convalescent hospital because I was planning a trip of some pilgrims to go to the beatification of Padre Pio. And I had taken a group last fall over there when there weren't that many crowds, and we toured Italy. We went to the monastery. We went to his home in Pietrelcina and so on. I spent several afternoons in bed with angina, and our chaplain had to kind of take everything over, but then he spoke Italian and he could do a lot of things that I couldn't do. The trip for the beatification had to be canceled. I took a massive heart attack. It was a coronary. And I'm getting to be quite an old lady now. You see, I'm 70, and I'm also a diabetic. So I collapsed in the emergency of the Ottawa Civic Hospital. Apparently it was total heart failure. I drove myself over. Would have taken too long to get 911, I guess. And walked in, fell down on the floor. And later they told me it was total heart failure. They told my children that I was not a candidate for a quadruple bypass, which they then proceeded to do. And being a diabetic, it didn't heal very well. So I'm like the man who came to dinner. I went to this convalescent place for 3 weeks, and I have been there 5 months. And they have a nursing staff that changes these bandages and so on. So I have a little trouble walking, and that's why I was helped up on the podium, at least behind the podium, not on it. I want to show you, before I begin my talk, the topic is the traditionalist hero, Padre Pio. And I'd like to show you this picture. Well, I'll hold it this way. Can you all see it? That's a picture of Padre Pio kissing the ring of Archbishop Lefebvre. Now, the picture, as I understand it, was taken Easter Monday of 1968. Padre Pio died September 23rd of the same year. A picture says 1,000 words. This book I'm writing, I've been doing it for years. I had to shelve it at one time because of personal tragedy in my family. And I've recently taken it up again, and it should have been here tonight. I was going to launch it tonight while I was here. But the publishing people who are doing this in Ottawa changed their premises, and this delayed things more than 6 weeks. And so now we're looking at a publication date of the end of September or into October. But on the back of my book, we are going to have this picture. And I will tell you what the cut line is underneath it. The kiss of a saint. Now, the point is that one of the charisms of Padre Pio, any who read about him and knew about him, he had the gift of prophecy, and he had the gift of discernment of souls. In a man as important as Archbishop Lefebvre has been in the retention of the Latin Tridentine Mass, and this was an influence that was worldwide, and that as he became also a worldwide controversial figure. Padre Pio couldn't afford to be wrong here. He's now blessed, he is a saint. They will canonize him, hopefully, quite soon. And so, if poor Archbishop Lefebvre, whom I count among my friends, he said Mass in my home, my children loved him, he was a gentle and wonderful man. And what has happened is most unfortunate. We can't deny what has happened, of course. But if he were really under the shadow that many people would like to see him, this picture would not exist. I think many of you would agree with that. Because with his gift of prophecy, down the road, he would not want to be, Padre Pio would not want to be in company with a man disgraced before the world, and disgraced, through the church itself. There has been something happening here which no doubt will be rectified. It's just like your dear Father Feeney, whom I've always considered to be a saint. And I know that you people consider him to be a saint. The people at the St. Benedict Center do. And the shadow was over his head. In fact, I got very upset with one of the Fraternity of St. Peter priests. We're glad to have the Mass in Ottawa. We have a parish there that has the Tridentine Mass every day and twice on Sundays. And this young priest, who has to remain nameless, it was 3 years ago, he was there, and as an assistant, and he was teaching catechism. I'm going to put this back on the chair so you can look at it. Thank you, Gary. Just put it there. And he spent a whole evening, I wasn't there, it was reported to me, talking about the Feeniites, stay away from those people and all this kind of thing. And it's just not understood. There are some people who do not understand these things. I would like to tell you that in connection with Padre Pio being a traditionalist hero, certainly that's the first thing you can say about him. But what I would like to do this evening, I thought about this before, and I was preparing some things, or a few remarks to make. And then I thought, since the book is not available yet, I asked the publisher to take the first chapter and blow it up a little, because while I wear contact lenses at my age, maybe I need a seeing-eyed dog, but I would have this blown up so I could see it. So I'm going to read you just a little bit about it, because I start the book mentioning Pope Leo XIII, and you will see why. And there's a connection with Padre Pio and this Pope. There's an interconnection that I found astounding when I went into his history. So I will take this now, and you see, I always walk around with a lot of books, and what I couldn't carry in, and another very kind lady carried in for me, thank you very much, is a purse, okay? More like a suitcase. There's another book, it's not up here, but these are the volumes of Padre Pio's letters. And they are so beautiful. You see, he died under an interdict, in case you didn't know that. He was not allowed to preach, and he was not allowed to write letters. But back in the old days, he had written a number of letters, and they did preserve them. They put a call out in time that these people had not all died, and they got copies of these letters, and there's 3 volumes in print now. They're working on a 4th one. And the 4th one, I understand, of course, will be in Italian. It'll take another couple of years to put them in English. These are in English. In any case, the book that I've written is called Arrivederci Padre Pio. a spiritual daughter remembers. And so I have tried to show what Padre Pio was and is to those that I know and have come across in all these years, because it was 1962 when I was there, and I went back in the spring of 1963. But I'm going to read you this. I may not read the entire chapter, but I want to let you know that we are aware of the evils in the church at the present time, and we're aware of the remedies that are available to us, and Padre Pio is a great example of the priesthood. So this first chapter 1 is called The Pope Who Loved St. Francis. One of the most treasured volumes in the multifaceted Catholic library of this writer is a book over 100 years old. It is a magnificent biography of Pope Leo XIII, the former Joachim Cardinal Pecci, who succeeded the illustrious Pope Pius IX to the papal throne on February the 20th, 1878. The work was printed in 1887 as a souvenir of the Jubilee, the Golden Jubilee year of Pope Leo XIII, and is magnificently bound. Written by Bernard Riley, D.D., L.D. Laval, and published by Charles L. Webster and Company, New York, it was simultaneously published in England, in France, in Germany, as well as in Spain, Italy, and the Netherlands. Since the copyright has long since expired, liberty has been taken to quote certain passages within contexts appropriate. The year 1887 was a most significant year, and a year of great splendor, but this is not only because it was the Golden Jubilee year of Pope Leo XIII. It was also the year of the birth, on May the 25th, in a humble little village in the south of Italy, of a certain Francesco Forgione, later to be known throughout the entire world as Padre Pio of Pietrelcina, OFM Capuchin. That singular event, his birth, under the pontificate of Leo XIII, and in the Golden Jubilee year of His Holiness, 1887, ushered in a new and glorious era in the long and troubled history of the Roman Catholic priesthood. For this most exceptional priest, Padre Pio, was to rise up as an authentic and sublime model for all Catholic priests, whose glorious calling in this 20th century has been so wickedly undermined as to fall lower than it has ever fallen before in recorded human history. Today, with massive confusion within and without the Catholic Church, unprecedented reports of scandalous activities rampant among the Catholic clergy have disillusioned and embittered hundreds of thousands of Catholic believers. Trust and confidence in clergy as a group has been inestimably shattered, if not outrightly destroyed altogether. Judging from the news items issuing forth from the secular media, the sexual assaulting of altar boys and scores of young children in general would appear to be the principal major occupation of a large percentage of Catholic clergy worldwide. This situation is all the more profoundly horrifying since the prevailing tenor of thought among those guilty of these unspeakable predatory crimes, and their sympathizers, even among bishops, seems to be some kind of rigid satanic conviction that homosexuality between priests and other men, and pedophilia between clergy and young children, is somehow a supremely holy act, even pleasing and meritorious before Almighty God. Thus would the Catholic priesthood of today seem to be undergoing an obvious divine chastisement consisting of abysmal and invincible blindness for its scornful rejection of Our Lady of Fatima's urgent plea to have, number one, her warnings disseminated throughout our world, and number two, the beautiful and healing remedy for all our ills, the devotion and consecration to her Immaculate Heart, preached, pursued, and implemented. Instead of this, we have the spiritually devastating spectacle of an unprecedented number of Judases ex-priests who have treated our blessed Lord in the same evil and treacherous manner as their infamous forerunner. Ex-priests who, not satisfied with stabbing the divine heart with their faithlessness, have broken their sacred vows altogether, have abandoned their sublime calling, and with it, the eternal responsibility to the immortal souls confided to their ministry on the day of their priestly ordination, to obtain, under one pretext or another, the status of laicization, most usually in order to pursue goals vastly at variance with the principles espoused at the Sacrament of Holy Orders. My grace is sufficient for thee, our Lord has told the world. While only God can judge these individuals, and certainly many of them must bear an inner torment, their public rejection of true Catholicism and their contribution to the revolution in the Church has broken the hearts of their countless families, many of whom had to make painful sacrifices to educate them for the priesthood, and scandalized vast numbers of decent people. If these unfortunate persons would only withdraw from the scene and live out their unhappy lives in private, the element of scandal might be somewhat contained, and the mercy of God might reach them through the prayers and sufferings offered up by the devout and charitable. But no, they seem not content to pursue only their own ruin. They seem possessed of a burning lust to bring about the downfall of others, particularly the innocent. And they seek tirelessly, with what might be construed as satanic pride, acceptance, not only in society at large, but in their former families as well. They muzzle what is left of their consciences with militant bravado, seeking companionship and support among their equally traitorous buddies, and have even organized formal groups to have the strength in numbers to give some public muscle to their agenda. They are determined, for instance, against all laws of the Church to, quote unquote, say Mass, especially if they are married, thus trashing solemn promises they were required to make in order to obtain laicization. In the first place, namely, to abstain from playing any role, large or small, in any Catholic liturgical service for the rest of their lives, and to abstain from any role in the teaching or directing of young people. These groups of ex-priests promote contraception, support abortion, homosexuality, women in the priesthood, sex education, remarriage of the separated and divorced, and a host of causes directly aimed at militating against tradition. In charity, of course, we must be concerned for their souls, but charity begins at home, and we must take appropriate measures to protect our loved ones, our children, grandchildren, friends, and fellow Catholics in general from falling in any way under their poisonous influence. Add to this a recollection of the words of Christ, Matthew 7:15-21. By their fruits you shall know them. And our moral conscience draws us inevitably to examine the blatantly observable fruits of Vatican Council II. These begin with the public abandonment of the cross of Christ and the institution in its place of a sort of cult of jubilation in the pleasures of this world, the casting aside of all the traditional restraints, the burial of self-denial, mortification, and penance, the assiduous and even frantic espousal of a particularly virulent form of false ecumenism, which has resulted in an all-pervasive mentality that assesses all souls as saved, and which virtually drinks in errors of all kinds and descriptions, and which looks to Protestant, Jewish, Buddhist, Hindu, and other gurus for the key to spiritual and physical well-being, and which spawns a universal open toleration and even promotion of formal heretics in high places. This, of course, has resulted in a total abandonment of the teaching of true doctrines from the pulpit, substituting most principally a blatant denial of the reality of sin and a consequent scorn for the sacraments, especially that of penance, and espousing a politically correct format for sermons, if any, combined with a widespread and even official contempt for tradition and an even greater contempt for those who choose to pursue it. One of the greatest cancers on the body of the Church has been that with the abandonment of tradition, there has also been a parallel proliferation of a staggering anti-purity campaign to indoctrinate and corrupt innocent young souls in the philosophy and mechanics of unrestrained and limitless sexual activity. The reprehensible and contemptible Dr. Mary Calderon, the American Grand Madame of sex education in the schools, admitted in a printed interview on the pages of the pornographic Playboy magazine in 1968 that her purpose, quote unquote, in promoting sex education in the schools was to, quote, lower the age of sex enjoyment to children, unquote. It was also to turn children against their parents, as the school courses were designed to present explicit descriptions of perversions, and by inference, the children were expected to consider these to be regular practices between their parents. One Ottawa boy subjected to these classes came home one day from school to confront his mother and father in the living room. Now I know what you and Mom are up to up there in your bedroom, and I find you both disgusting. It was months before he would speak to his parents. This boy was a student in an Ottawa Catholic school. Dr. Mary Calderon founded the notorious SIECUS organization, S-I-E-C-U-S, Sex Information and Education Council of the United States, a skillfully designed smokescreen for the public who would interpret this pretentious title as being some form of American governmental agency, an agency promoted vigorously by pharmaceutical companies into huge profits, peddling contraceptives, and which would eventually become a guru center for the busy beavers operating Planned Parenthood and the even busier beavers among the large number of totally corrupt North American Catholic Church hierarchy. I can speak more for my country than for yours, but that's not mentioned here. But anyway, the plan was to capture the approval of these bishops holding spiritual power over the laity in their diocese so that Catholics would be forced to bow to these programs under obedience, in quotes, to church authorities. The great weapon smirkingly used by liberals in positions over traditionalists to extract compliance. The objective being to force Catholics to, quote unquote, lead the way, for Protestants and non-believers of every stripe and description to follow this Catholic, quote unquote, leadership. The aim to have Catholics accept it first, and they did by the thousands, making the point that if Catholics, whose true practice in religion demanded a very strict moral code, thought it beneficial, then what on earth could be wrong with sex education in the schools? In my own Archdiocese of Ottawa, during the 1970s, this writer publicly opposed these programs and these perpetrators incessantly as a regular guest on radio talk shows and appearing as often as possible on television, with trips around the country giving public conferences and with articles in various publications. The vicious slander to discredit Anne Cillis emanating from the Chancery and elsewhere, and later from my own pastor, the late Charles-Henri Balache, pursued me everywhere. And I was called everything from a deranged nutcase to an unstable sensation seeker. Some of the other names you cannot print. If you can't fight the message, kill the messenger. Our present situation in the same Archdiocese of Ottawa is that not only was the sex education scenario in the schools not withdrawn, on the contrary, it has been pursued under our present Archbishop Marcel Gervais, with a vehemence and dedication unmatched anywhere in North America, and as I suspect, anywhere else in the world. The sex education program currently imposed upon Ottawa's Catholic schools was ostensibly conceived and written by Archbishop Gervais when he was Bishop of Sault Ste. Marie in Northern Ontario, and it is called Fully Alive. The latest extension of this disgusting, pornographic, and anti-Catholic program is now an addended program for the schools on AIDS, which includes, among other things, the presenting to 8 and 9-year-olds the mechanics of sodomy, accompanied by explanatory pictures and diagrams. The Archbishop is adamant that this program is both necessary and salutary, and these parents and traditionalist activities who have opposed it have been vilified and publicly attacked by diocesan satellites who would appear to be climbing the corporate ladder in the Archdiocesan Chancery. A paradox herein presents itself. This is the same Archbishop who has made history in North America by presenting himself as a true liberal, namely one who is capable of publicly appearing to uphold and advance the rights and desires of Catholic traditionalists, while at the same time promoting factions totally opposed to their objectives. It was he who in 1994 personally authorized the priestly fraternity of St. Peter to enter the archdiocese and take over the community, which until 1984 had been known as the Latin Congregation of Ottawa. By 1994, the large group had become St. Clement's Parish, and the priestly fraternity on January the 1st, 1995, installed a fine, young, newly ordained Canadian priest of this order as pastor. By this time, the congregation had a large, regular parish church. This writer has been a member of the group since 1968 and can express a certain thankfulness to God that since that date in January 1995, a daily Tridentine Mass has been made available to the parishioners with all the sacraments, and 2 such Masses every Sunday, one low Mass at 8:30 and a high Mass at 10 a.m. This is also the same Archbishop who agreed on and carried out 2 traditional ordinations in Latin of St. Peter's fraternity members, 1 candidate in June of 1996 and 3 candidates in June of 1998, both ceremonies executed with the magnificent backdrop of the Ottawa Archdiocesan Cathedral on Sussex Drive, the world-famous Basilica of Notre Dame of the Immaculate Conception. The Archdiocese of Ottawa is dedicated to and under the protection of Our Lady of the Immaculate Conception. The vestments on both occasions, cloth of gold and breathtaking in their splendor, were commissioned for the great and stunning Marian Congress of 1947, initiated and presided over by the saintly late Archbishop Alexander Vachon, who, God willing, will one day be a candidate for canonization. The Archbishop not only performed these ordinations impeccably, according to the old rite, but he allowed the professional videotaping of the 1998 event, and the result is a stunning and sublime record in full color of the moving and deeply inspiring ceremony. Father Michael has a copy. I sent him one. I think he likes it. I hope he does anyway. He says he's loaned it. The video is so beautiful that it is difficult to watch it without feeling a true twinge of compassion for this Archbishop, and a certain holy hope that perhaps at one point in time, sooner rather than later, 'tis a consummation devoutly to be wished, he will reverse his liberal stands and become one of us. Anything is possible with God, or Amos. He has the strong leadership qualities that could make him a great traditional leader. This basilica, a majestic neo-Gothic cathedral, unmatched anywhere in North America, is, however, targeted for renovations by Archbishop Gervais, who has recently raised more than $10 million by taxing parishes, including St. Clement's, this is the Latin parish, and who, despite the basilica's official archaeological designation as a, quote, National Historical Heritage Building, unquote, insists that he does not care about the rest of the country. Quote, this is my cathedral and I will do what I want with it. And also, they, the rest of the country, don't give me 1 cent, unquote. His plans, expressed at a clandestine meeting of Ottawa Catholics on March 26, 1998, this writer was present, include the removal of the high altar, replete with exquisite and priceless French-Canadian wood carvings in order to make room for his quote-unquote chair. The Blessed Sacrament, he announced, in answer to a question as to where this would be located, would be relegated to the basement, quote-unquote, and the crypt containing the tombs of former archbishops, including the revered Vachon, who died in March of 1953, would be removed, quote, to make room for more kitchen space, unquote. None of the above can be denied, as a local journalist taped the entire meeting. Our glorious basilica, its dazzling interior captured possibly for the last time on the film of the Ordination 1998 video, and erected in the last century by the sacrifices and sufferings of the poor and the devout, is in danger at this writing of becoming what may end up looking like a combination bowling alley and daycare center, perhaps even embellished with slot machines and fast food concessions. Such are the local troubles and sorrows, at least in Ottawa, home of this writer and Canada's capital. I think we must admit that at the foundation of the proliferation of all these horrors has been the arrogant and ruthless, forcible imposition of an alien and disturbing liturgy, conceived and brought to birth by a unanimous team of Protestant theologians chaired by Pope Paul VI, who later admitted that this liturgy of the Novus Ordo was designed to appeal most of all to Calvinists. A liturgy deliberately contrived to denigrate the priesthood, the presider over the assembly, in quotes, is obviously a far departure from the mediator between God and man, principally employed in offering sacrifice, as described in the true Catholic catechisms of old, and thereby also contrived to denigrate the powers of the priesthood, leading to a collective denial of the real presence of our blessed Lord in the Blessed Sacrament and a consequent attack upon all the sacraments of the Roman Catholic Church. These abominations worldwide have been accompanied by the deliberate and programmed removal from churches, chapels, hospitals, schools, and all devotional centers, including convents and monasteries, of religious images, the statues and sacred pictures, even Stations of the Cross, so dear to saints like the great St. Teresa of Avila, doctor of the Church and reformer of the Carmelites. St. Teresa was a great Spanish mystic who was fond of pronouncing these items to be, quote, absolutely necessary to the nourishment and fostering of the Catholic faith among the people. In the wake of the callous removal of these necessities to the maintaining of our faith, we have witnessed the advent of whole gangs of the most brazen women in pants, striding boldly about the new altars, quote unquote, handling the chalice and other sacred vessels like summer cottage kitchenware, and even daring to drink the precious blood, the giving out of communion from fingers sprouting long and wildly varnished claws, what else, other word can we use, reading from the pulpit almost always in inappropriate attire, except in winter when the incentive to stay warm will usually override the desire to flaunt and expose the flesh. The list is endless. Then there are the parades of the more extreme feminists, those who aspire to capture the priesthood for themselves, the feminazis, alternatively cooing and screaming into the ears of terrified bishops who cower and tremble and in total slavery and utter subservience accede to their every un-Catholic and unholy request. No doubt many of these bishops, in the private hell of their desperation for deliverance from these harpies, would be in utter consternation were it ever to dawn upon them that their agonized captivity is a heavenly chastisement for their burying of devotions to the sweet and gentle Mother of God. They have not listened to their mother, and so God himself has sent them the Valkyries. We have had all this cast against a backdrop of a massive exodus of consecrated souls, both men and women, from their religious orders and hence from their vows. Among those who remain, 65-year-old nuns in shorts and painted toenails squabble noisily with each other in competition for supremacy over other newly enlightened community members, gleefully embracing a totally new paradigm, liberating them forever from the tiresome and also unnecessary rigors of pursuing virtue and holiness within the framework of a disciplined routine designed to pursue and achieve personal sanctification and that of others, freeing them, of course, to bray like jackasses and provide even greater scandal to what remains of the faithful at large by their public behavior and attire, paraded before Catholics who have already been robbed of the faith of their ancestors by a complete compendium of all these things and persons. And now, nearly 2 generations of young Catholics, totally uninstructed in the ways of virtue and holiness, are growing up as in a wild vegetable garden, where the mutations have now become indistinguishable. Young people with hard heads and even harder hearts. Young people with no respect for authority, starting with parents, never mind grandparents. An anarchistic generation looking for instant gratification on all levels of endeavor, and whose basic concept of life in general is centered around some vague grasp of a philosophy having as its basis me as the center of the universe. The preceding horrible scenario is somewhat counterbalanced by the existence of more than just a few really devout, good, and even holy priests who find themselves persecuted, hounded, and chased down, most principally by their bishops and fellow clergy, and if caught, are virtually seized and deported off to church-supported recycling centers with programs designed to squash round pegs into very square holes, and which cruel and communistic procedures deliberately and successfully precipitate clerical nervous breakdowns. Those who survive to pursue their priesthood, thus crippled, often do so, risking their lives in what can only be called a bombed-out war zone. Many have not survived. Many have gone to their graves with broken hearts. So much for the fruits of Vatican Council II. For readers who may have managed to read these last few pages and have sadly concluded that this is just another doom and gloom book, this writer urges a renewed focus on what we Catholics have always known, namely that God is in charge. And in his divine providence, he has permitted us to suffer all these wrongs. This book is about Padre Pio and about the signs and wonders that have surrounded his holy life. This book is about this writer's encounter with him and the remembrances of life before meeting him, and about the many inspiring and very beautiful uplifting stories and anecdotes that reinforce us in our faith and give us courage and hope and perseverance in prayer and sufferings, and holy optimism in God's goodness and beneficence. Padre Pio is God's great gift to us in this century. There is really no one, not even among those of us who love him the most, who can really fathom the depths of his spirituality, his immense love for our blessed Lord crucified, and the almost equally immense love for our Blessed Mother. These were his 2 great loves, the crucifix and Our Lady. And these loves were what made him saintly. His beatification on May the 2nd of this year, 1999, opens the way to the public and formal, official veneration that he deserves as a model of priestly holiness, towards which the poor souls of fallen clergy can turn with confidence, repentance, and love, and clergy trying already to live holy and priestly lives can adopt as their true friend a real priest's priest, interceding for them to be faithful to the end. Perhaps it would be most appropriate at this point to quote a beautiful passage given to me in San Giovanni Rotondo in December of 1962. It was given by one who became my dear friend, the late Countess Carola Filippetti of Venice. She died in 1972, by the way, a friend of Pope Pius XII. And this is the quote. It had been in Italian, and she translated it for me. As far as I know, this has never been printed on this side of the Atlantic. Here's the text. Jesus, in his infinite mercy, has deigned to reveal to Suore Maria Francesca Foresti, TOF, of Bologna, Italy, foundress of the Suore Francescani Adoratrici, who now enjoys the glory of paradise, the following about Padre Pio. And this is the quote. This is our Lord speaking, by the way. Quote, "The soul of Padre Pio is indefatigable strength and a clear heaven in which the splendid faces of the angels are reflected. His soul is a wine cellar from which I can draw to my pleasure, a honeycomb, a refuge from the ingratitude of men, the mirror of my soul in which I am reflected, just as a very pure ray of sunlight flashes in a pure crystal. My voice is in him as an echo between two mountains. His speech is sweet and sincere, as mysterious as mine. It comforts and strikes down. It crushes as my intense rain. Because I, Jesus, live in him, the Holy Ghost, diffused as a liquid, works within him. An act, a word, a glance of the Padre works more than the eloquence of an orator. He is the life of the body and of the spirit. I acknowledge everything he does. Your Padre is the masterpiece of my mercy, to whom I have given all the gifts of my spirit as to no other creature. He is my perfect imitation, my altar, my sacrifice, my host, my pleasure, my glory. This was the child born in that humble village in Italy's south, Pietrelcina, in the glorious Jubilee year, 1887, of His Holiness Pope Leo XIII. That same year, 1887, was as well the year of an historic and poignant encounter between that same Pope Leo XIII and an angelic-looking young French girl from Normandy, a girl with large, misty blue eyes and an abundance of long, silky blonde curls, a young girl hardly more than a child, only 14 years old, but who would one day be called the greatest saint of modern times by one of Leo's successors, Pope Pius XI. Marie-Françoise Thérèse Martin of Lisieux. She wanted more than anything else in the world to enter the Carmel of Lisieux. Two of her 4 sisters, Pauline and Marie, were already there. She wanted to give her life in prayer and sufferings for priests, and she did not want to wait. She wanted to enter when she would be 15 years of age. The local superiors and Catholic Church representatives in her home diocese of Bayeux had all tried to discourage her. Formidable in this opposition, Canon Reverny, the Vicar General, had been especially uncooperative, even hostile. She was much too young to enter into such an austere life, as she was repeatedly told. Her last resort was to make an appeal to the Pope. Her father, Louis Martin, now declared venerable as of March the 26th, 1993, along with her mother, Zélie, supported her vocation totally, even although it was no small sacrifice for him to consider such a separation from his youngest and favorite child, his little queen, left motherless at the age of 4 and brought up by her elder sisters under the guidance of their beloved father. And so he arranged to join a Jubilee year pilgrimage to Rome from Lisieux. This would enable him to take Thérèse and her older sister Céline to Rome, and thus to a papal audience with Pope Leo XIII. In the wonderful book, The Story of a Family, by Father Stéphane Piot, OFM, reprinted recently by Tad Books in Rockford, Illinois, the following excerpt is significant and descriptive. Quote, "Following after the Bishop of Coutances, Canon Reverny offered to the Holy Father the homage of the Diocese of Bayeux, and also as a Jubilee gift, a lace rochet in the Louis XIV style, bearing the papal arms as well as those of several Norman cities. The masterpiece had taken the workers 8,000 days to make. Then the queue of pilgrims began to file past, kneeling one by one before the Pope, kissing his feet and receiving his blessing. The Vicar General had taken care to warn them aloud that, quote, it was absolutely forbidden to speak to the Holy Father, unquote. He confined himself to pointing out to Leo XIII any notable pilgrims, and it was thus that he paused to draw attention to Monsieur Martin as being the father of 2 Carmelite nuns. The Sovereign Pontiff, quote, as a pledge of particular benevolence, let his hand rest longer on that pilgrim's head, quote, seeming thus, as says the autobiography, that is of Saint Therese, to mark him with a mysterious seal in the name of Christ himself. Still under the impression of this gesture, what was not the father's surprise after the ceremony, when his Therese reached him weeping in distress, infringing all the prohibitions she had dared to address the Pope, who for a moment had bent down his head over her until he brushed her forehead. Quote, "Most Holy Father, in honor of your Jubilee, permit me to enter Carmel at 15. Unquote. The action annoyed Monsieur Reverny, who, by stating that the superiors were considering the matter, had to some extent dictated the pontiff's evasive reply. It was in vain that the girl insisted. The head of the church answered in a penetrating tone, emphasizing every word. "Come, come," he said, "you will enter if it is God's will." And he raised his hand to bless her, looking at her fixedly, while the noble guard led her away in tears. There are other accounts that mention that Therese responded to the Vicar General's comment about the superiors looking into the case. She reportedly pleaded, "Holy Father, if only you would say yes, they would all have to agree." In a letter from Céline to the dear Carmelites, her sisters back in Lisieux, she says, quote, "Therese was so sweet at the Holy Father's feet. She was kneeling, her hands clasped and resting on the Pope's knee, and her eyes were so imploring. It was a beautiful sight," unquote. And what of Therese herself? What was her reaction to what had amounted to a very crushing cross? She wrote her own letter from Rome to Pauline, her little mother, the second eldest of the 5 Martin girls, into whose arms she had thrown herself when their adored mother Zélie had been taken from them in death, and the little one was only 4 years old. Pauline at the Carmel in Lisieux was now Mother Agnes of Jesus, and she had encouraged her little sister to speak out, in quotes, to the Pope. "Oh, Pauline," this is a quote of Therese's letter, "Oh, Pauline, I cannot tell you how I felt. I was utterly crushed. I felt forsaken, and then I am so far, so far. I feel like crying as I write this letter. My heart is so full. However, God has given me the strength to bear this trial. It is very heavy indeed, but Pauline, I am a little ball for the child Jesus to play with. If he wishes to break his plaything, he's quite free to do so. Yes, I will all that he wills. I have not written nearly all I wanted. I cannot express these things. I should need to speak to you, and then you will not read this letter until 3 days after that. Oh, Pauline, I have only God all alone, all alone. Goodbye, Pauline, darling. I do not say more. I am afraid lest Father should come and ask to read my letter, and that is impossible." A footnote on the page where this letter is reproduced in the story of a family explains that Therese was afraid that Monsieur Martin would be upset at seeing her suffer so much. And so, when little Therese, who would one day be called the little flower of Jesus, knelt at the feet of Pope Leo XIII with the most urgent outpouring of her heart that wanted in effect to pray and suffer all her life long for priests. The date was Sunday, November the 20th, 1887. Only 5 days later, a baby boy named Francesco in Pietrelcina, a village south of Rome, would be turning 6 months old. Therese had been on the earth already 14 years. Did the noble prayers and sacrifices of this little girl wring from the heart of God the gift to the world of the only priest in history to bear the wounds of Christ? Did the love that consumed her heart while only a mere child win for us the priest who became Padre Pio? Yes, 1887 was a remarkable, splendid, and glorious year. And it was no mere coincidence that this Jubilee year of Pope Leo XIII would see the birth of a son of St. Francis of Assisi, who would bring new luster and brilliance to that branch of the Friars Minor known as the Capuchin order. Padre Pio, at the age of only 5, vowed his future to St. Francis. And the Franciscan order down through the centuries has had more canonized saints than any other religious order, bar none. As one reads the life of Pope Leo XIII, one is spiritually captivated by the wealth of details that interconnect this great pope and the man who became Padre Pio. Joachim Cardinal Paci had been Bishop of Perugia at the time of his elevation to the College of Cardinals. The Blessed Virgin Mary is called in her litany the Mother of Divine Grace because she gave birth to the Redeemer, the author and fount of grace. A votive church near Perugia bore also the title of Our Lady of Grace. In it was a picture or statue of Our Lady, which Cardinal Paci had crowned on a former occasion. The martyr St. Lawrence was the patron saint of the whole area. At his silver jubilee in 1871, it is recorded that, quote, in the afternoon there were pontifical vespers, a sermon on the Christian priesthood, Te Deum, and benediction. The vota, or prayers recorded for the cardinal bishop, are too remarkable to be omitted here. Quote, Mary, Mother of Grace, who art the protectress, honor, and joy of the people of Perugia, do thou someday repay with a crown of glory Joachim, our cardinal bishop, in return for the golden diadem which his filial hands formerly placed around thy virginal brow. Holy Lawrence, thou who art given a command over nature, be propitious, we pray thee, to Joachim, our cardinal and pastor. Grant him to the end of his life that strength with which thou didst appall thy executioners while consumed by the slow tortures of thy red-hot gridiron, in order that the men who are continually torturing the church by their plots may admire him in spite of themselves. The Roman deacon St. Lawrence was treasurer of the church, or the administrator of the depository of the funds destined for the poor. He was roasted on a gridiron over a slow fire to force him to give up the monies which he had already distributed to the poor. It is part of his story that he told his torturers, you can turn me over now, I'm done enough on this side. Our Lady of Grace is the name of the Capuchin monastery of San Giovanni Rotondo, where Padre Pio spent more than 50 years of his life. St. Lawrence is the saint whose annual feast day falls on August the 10th, the date chosen for the ordination of Padre Pio to the holy priesthood in 1910. The setting was the Cathedral of Benevento. And now, the most stunning interconnection of all between Padre Pio and Pope Leo XIII, the Pope's great veneration for St. Francis of Assisi, Padre Pio's holy founder. A quote from my cherished biography of Leo XIII, quote, in 1875, Pope Pius IX, aware of the lifelong admiration of Cardinal Paci for St. Francis of Assisi and for the great family of men and women who for the last 600 years have followed in his footsteps, appointed him protector of the Third Order of St. Francis, an organization established by the saint to enable all persons living in the world to combine and help each other in practicing the cardinal virtues of the gospel. To help in any way towards restoring the Franciscan institutions in all their primitive vigor and splendor, to make known all over the earth the heavenly spirit of the Saint of Assisi, the passionate lover of Christ crucified, and the devoted follower of Christ's poverty, was to Cardinal Paci a labor of love, one into which he could throw himself with all the ardor of youth. He proceeded to Assisi as soon as he possibly could, and there, on November 26th, in an assemblage of all the Franciscan tertiaries, of the clergy regular and secular, and a great crowd of people, he took formal possession of his new charge. The address which he delivered on that occasion was only the prelude to more solemn and unauthoritative utterances in later years, as we shall see. When a few days ago he said, quote, His Holiness Pope Pius IX was pleased to appoint me protector of the confraternity of the Third Order of St. Francis, which sprang up so many centuries ago in this very city, my heart overflowed with joy. From my infancy I was devoted to this great saint, and I have always looked upon the Third Order founded by him as upon an institution springing from divine inspiration, one replete with Christian wisdom and fruitful in most blessed results for religion and the entire human race. To employ oneself in favoring and spreading such an order is to foster a work of the highest benefit to religion, to morality, and to civilization. It is to supply a salutary remedy for the enormous evils which affect society, and to restore upon earth the reign of holy charity and every virtue. Oh, may God grant that amid all the disasters which sadden our souls, and the misery amid which we are compelled to live, we may see with our own eyes a mighty multitude hastening to take refuge under the protection of the poverty-loving Saint of Assisi. Then we should, without a doubt, see those men becoming, in the hand of God, as so many instruments employed in the establishing on earth the quiet we have lost and the peace for which men pray so ardently. And further on we read, quote, although the most popular writers of our age in the English language, those most bitterly opposed to the Catholic Church, have bestowed praise on him whom Cardinal Paci calls in his text the Poverello d'Assisi, no man has been held up to so much contempt by French Voltairianism, by the revolutionists, the radicals, and socialists, who so clamorously profess their love for democratic simplicity, equality, and liberty. In the invasion of Italy and Spain by the revolutionary armies under the Bonapartes, no monastic order, no religious establishments were the object of such fanatical hatred or subjected to such horrible profanations and wanton destruction as the Franciscans, their churches, and their convents. And the men who today misgovern bulk countries under the banner of liberalism have inherited this same blind, inconsistent, and unreasoning fanaticism. Since the divine author of Christianity was born in a cave by the roadside, brought up in the laborious obscurity of the carpenter shop, and evangelized Judea and Galilee without possessing a roof of his own, a bed to repose upon, or a second garment for his use, no man has appeared upon earth who more sincerely, ardently, effectively labored to make the poverty of the gospel, its practical equality and brotherly love, all the divine charities which blossom and ripen upon the cross of Christ, to be loved truly and embraced heartily, than Francis of Assisi. His dream, his aim, the object of his entire life was to bring back Christendom, the society of the 13th century, to that democracy, that society of all mankind, become children of God and living on earth according to Christ's doctrine and example in the practice of all brotherly virtues. If this was a dream, it was a sublime, beautiful dream, one which should render the name of the dreamer dear to all lovers of humanity, all believers in the possibility of establishing here below a society in which order and freedom, equality and justice, charity and religion shall be no more visions of the brain, no subjects of idle aspiration or bootless quest, but a mighty and ever-present reality. Okay. The word was that voluntary mendicant of Assisi, who called around him men born like himself to wealth and station, but who aimed only at practicing anew upon earth the absolute and perfect poverty practiced by Christ and his apostles and disciples, their meekness, patience, and unbounded charity, in order that the Spirit which made their own poor selves so fragrant of paradise might penetrate into the palaces of the great, the homes of the wealthy, the cottages of the laboring poor, and be like the attraction of a divine magnetism, drawing all men and women, and not indeed to become monks and nuns, but to band themselves together for the purpose of despising the pride of earthly riches, the enjoyment of sinful luxury and pleasure, of seeking out the needy, the suffering, the heart-sore, and the captive, and of making a brotherly love the law of life for Christian society. The men who wanted to be Christ-like in poverty, in self-denial and self-sacrificing devotion to their fellow men, followed Francis in his manner of living. The women under St. Clara or Clare, the townswoman of Francis, emulated the poverty and virtues of Mary, the mother of Christ, whom he on the cross gave to the fisherman John, the son of Zebedee, to be cared for as a mother, homeless and shelterless as she was. Men and women living in the world who desired, in the measure possible for them, to imitate Christ and his mother, and to bring back among the Christian society the brotherly love, the gentleness, the spirit of prayer, the tender care of the poor and sick, which the Acts of the Apostles describe as existing in the first Christian community in Jerusalem, became members of the Third Order. Within the saint's lifetime, it counted more than 500,000 of persons of every condition of life, from kings and queens to peasants and shepherds. Saint Louis, King of France, and his cousin, Saint Ferdinand of Castile and Leon, with their mothers and their queens, with many a noble matron and maiden in their courts, and crowds of their subjects, underwent to practice the evangelical morality and all the divine virtues under the protection of that lowly mendicant of Assisi. Let us not be turned aside from the contemplation of noble ideals because men have failed to make of them permanent and widespread practical realities. We should never effect any reform or improvement in our own lives or in the world around us if we allow ourselves to be cast down by the inconsistencies and failures of men who had begun well and then fallen away. Let us listen rather to the men who in the present need of society and the whole moral world endeavor to revive in themselves and to restore wherever their influence extends the divine spirit of heroic perfection which animated men long ago, and which, like the seeds of the noblest plants, God never allows to perish utterly from the face of the earth. Such a man was and is Joachim Pesci. From his earliest boyhood, his feet had trodden the bare cloisters of the Franciscan Observatines near his mother's home in Carpineto. His admiration for these faithful followers of the Saint of Assisi had grown with his growth. As a youth, a priest, the governor of provinces, the honored diplomat, the bishop, and the cardinal, he had known these Franciscan lovers of evangelical poverty, known them thoroughly, and his veneration had gone on increasing. The Third Order of seculars, or persons living in the world, had become extinct, and nearly so under the joint action of Voltairean ridicule and revolutionary violence. Honestly, conscientiously, Joachim Pesci believed that to receive the spirit and the rule of St. Francis of Assisi, to propagate this secular Third Order among all ranks of Christian people, would be the providential means to renew the face of the earth. We believe that in our day, practice is more potent than preaching, examples more than mere profession. Remember, this is all written 100 years ago, more than that. We believe if ever the countries of ancient Christendom are brought back to Christ, it must be not by the eloquence of a St. Paul, a St. Bernard, or a Bossuet, but by diviner examples of poverty, purity, self-denial, and self-sacrifice than even those beheld in the apostolic age. Men who remember how prepotent feudalism had marred at the end of the 12th and the beginning of the 13th century the fairest fruits of the Christian culture of preceding ages, and how military might, violence, and licentiousness were the only forces apparently which controlled or aimed at controlling European society, will not be astonished that Providence, in seeking to restore the Christian ideal, should have inspired the Poverello of Assisi to become in his life and person a living image of his divine master. We have followed his footsteps in Italy and Spain, from the hills above Bologna to Florence and Rome, and from Rome to Barcelona, and all along the Pilgrim's Road to Galicia and the Sepulchre of St. James. Men like Charles Dickens and Ruskin can understand and appreciate the beautiful legends which weave themselves around the supernatural life of a man so divine. How the blood gushing from his self-imposed austerities and falling on the thorny shrubs in winter forthwith was transformed into flowers of supernal hue and fragrance, how in the province of Vish, a barren tract to which the saint withdrew to meditate and pray, became a land of flowers, while the fountain at which he cooled the ardor of the consuming fire within him became a fount of healing waters. No wonder that beneath those feet, which he yearned to stretch out to the nails that pierced his masters, our earth, athirst for Christ-like holiness, meekness, and charity, should spontaneously put forth flowers unseen before. We need such men now. We shall need them more in the evil days the world has to pass through, till from out the extremity of ill shall come the salutary reaction." Unquote. The above long passage closes chapter 17 of Bernard Riley's superlative biography of Pope Leo XIII, written over 100 years ago in the Pope's Golden Jubilee of 1887 and published to honor that Jubilee. God knew well the Franciscan heart of Joachim Pesci, the supreme pontiff Pope Leo, and what exquisite providential mercy he emanated when he sent into our world in that very Jubilee year a man such as we need now. Venerable as of December 1997, Padre Pio of Pietrelcina, whom our present pontiff John Paul II has beatified in our fair spring of 1999. The words quoted as having been written over a century ago could be taken as having been written yesterday. So utterly true are they now. At the beginning of this chapter, our present evils and woes are delineated. And the little Therese, who knelt at the feet of the great Franciscan-hearted Pope, was later declared patroness of France with St. Joan of Arc, and patroness of the missions equal to St. Francis Xavier. And now, the one who loved all priests enough to devote her life in prayer and suffering unto death is a doctor of the Church. She joins the exalted company of the only two other women so declared, St. Teresa of Avila and St. Catherine of Siena. Once Pope Innocent III had a dream. It was a very vivid dream, and he awoke in astonishment, wondering what this dream of his could mean. He dreamt that the great basilica of St. John Lateran in Rome was crumbling and falling into ruins. The basilica symbolizes the Catholic Church itself, because it is the seat of the Bishop of Rome, that's namely the Pope. Contrary to the understanding of many, St. Peter's does not have this status. Suddenly in the dream, a little man appeared and began straightening things up. Soon the basilica was completely restored. The Pope, awakened and trembling, wondered what all this could mean. A few weeks later, St. Francis of Assisi came to the papal court to request of the Holy Father the canonical erection of his order, the Friars Minor. Innocent III recognized him as the little man in his dream and was warmly disposed immediately to the granting of the request. St. John Lateran Basilica was in no physical danger of collapsing, but what it symbolized, namely the Catholic Church itself, was slowly being destroyed. And now in modern times, an even worse scenario prevails, and into this present sea of sorrows, God has sent us a great and wonderful blessing. His name is Padre Pio. That concludes the first chapter. But going on from there, we can see with the life of Padre Pio that he is a hero for the traditional church. It's very interesting, you see, now that he's beatified, because I remember speaking with many friends who also admire Padre Pio, that if they ever beatify him, and we were beginning to lose hope because there was such opposition to this, that means that they're beatifying tradition. They're beatifying the Holy Tridentine Mass and all that goes with our tradition. And that is what has happened. I want to say something at this time. I don't want to delay things too long tonight. If you get me talking on Padre Pio, it could go on for days, but it won't tonight. I have to assure you of that. But, you know, there's a rumor going around that he said the new Mass. No, he did not. I can tell you that that's absolutely untrue. And why these people are doing this, I have no idea. there were even priests. Even one of his fellow monks has been telling people this. It's not true. And one thing that you should know is that when he entered the Capuchin order, his mother asked him, "By what name will you be known?" And he said, "I will take the name of one who suffered." Pius V. Now, Pope St. Pius V is the Pope who presided over the latter part of the Council of Trent. But he issued a papal bull in 1572 called Quo Primum Tempore. And in that papal bull, he guaranteed to all Catholics to the end of time the Latin Tridentine Mass. And he guaranteed to all priests that they could say it, and they could not be forbidden to say it. And he placed an anathema, a curse really, on anyone who would interfere with this, you see. And he called on the wrath of the saints Peter and Paul if anyone would interfere with this. Now this Pope was a saint. And by the way, he's the Pope of Lepanto. You know, he had that vision the day of the great victory of Don John on October 7th, 1571. And then he installed, or shall we say, he promulgated the Feast of the Holy Rosary in honor of that great victory, because he was meeting with his cardinals, and then he went over to the window, and I guess he saw in the sky the vision of the victory. And he came back, and he says, Don John has won at Lepanto in the Gulf of Corinth. And you see, Don John of Austria had a very straggly bunch of sailors, and he was very ill-equipped. He was outnumbered by the Muslims, who had superior equipment, superior military strategy. But his sailors got down on the deck of the flagship and said the 15 decades of the Rosary to Our Lady and put their cause under her. And they won one of the most important naval victories in the history of Europe and of the world. And it kept the Muslims from overrunning the Christian countries thereon. But Pope Pius V is the Pope from whom Padre Pio takes his name. That's why he's called Padre Pio. And it's absolutely unthinkable that he would say an alien liturgy that was concocted, if you like, for the purpose of pleasing Protestants, when his own patron was the one who promised us that Mass. Now, at the Vatican Council, they realized they couldn't rescind Quo Primum. They took it out of the altar missals. Yes, it was in the front of all the altar missals up until Vatican II. But what they did was they promulgated another liturgy alongside of it, and then brutally imposed it. And that is what we have had to deal with. But as I say, you know, God is in charge. We know that. And we have to keep remembering that. Because in the middle of all these sorrows, we have a great traditional hero that we can appeal to. I want to just mention a couple of little things about Padre Pio that I think you would find interesting. When I was there in 1963, I was there the following year at Easter time, and I saw this priest across the salon in the Albergo Santa Maria della Grazia, which was where I was staying. It was a very nice hotel just down the hill from the monastery. And when I saw him, he looked kind of lonesome. I think when you're in Europe, and I lived there for 3 years because I taught in Germany for the Canadian Air Force, the high school students at the base in Zweibrücken. It gave me a lot of travel time, and so I was in Italy quite a lot. And I say, you get to know who speaks English. And when I saw this priest, I thought, he's either an American or a Canadian, or maybe he's from the British Isles. So I went over and I spoke to him. And I said, do you speak English? And he said, indeed I do. So he was British. So I got talking to him, and at that hotel, the meals were included with the room, and he had just arrived that afternoon. So we had a little talk in the salon. It turned out that the week before, he had been ordained at the Beta Seminary in Rome, which is a seminary for late vocations. I would say this man was in his mid-40s. And he had been ordained the week before, and I said, well, you've come down to see Padre Pio. And he said, well, you know, I don't know too much about him, but I was told this was an economical place to spend a holiday. So I'm down here, you see, for that. So I said, well, I guess you'll want to certainly go to his Mass. And I filled him in on what the routine was, and this was really ghastly. I mean, in order to get into the church, when they opened the doors at 1 minute to 5, the monks wouldn't open it any sooner, and his Mass was right at 5. They didn't want a huge noise in the church. They ended up with it anyway, but you had to line up at 2 o'clock in the morning, and the line went right down the hill. And anyway, so I told Father all about this. So then I thought, well, he doesn't know anyone. He's just arrived. I had met friends there in December, and they were back. And in this case, when the meals were all included, Father would have paid for that when he registered. So I said, we'll move the tables together. Why don't you have dinner with us and meet some of these other people? So he thought that was a great idea. So when we were retiring for the evening, which was quite early, you went to bed in that place about, well, Italian dinner goes on and on and on, but I mean, we were going to bed around 10. And he was heading for the stairs. And I said, well, Father, you know, you're going to have to get up before 2 and get up the hill and line up. And he said, you know, he said, I'm so grateful to you for introducing me to these people. He said, may I say Mass for you in the morning? I'd like to offer my Mass for you. Oh, well, I said, Father, that's such a great gift. How can I thank you? I was all ready to cry. I mean, he didn't have to give me anything, but here he had offered that. So I said, I'll tell you what I'll do. I go every morning to Padre Pio's Mass, but of course, he doesn't give communion anymore. He's too feeble. But other monks give it out. He stays at the altar praying. So what I'll do is I won't receive communion at Padre Pio's Mass. I'll receive it at yours. So that's fine. I didn't see him in the church. Apparently he'd gone into the sacristy to make arrangements. And after Padre Pio's Mass was over, about 5 minutes later, out comes this priest. His name is even kind of funny. When I asked him what his name was, it was Jack Pack. He's Father Jack Pack. So Father Jack Pack comes out to say Mass. He's all vested, and he's looking very holy, and he comes down along the side to the altar of St. Francis. This was in the new church at that time. So I had made friends with a young American girl at Penny Hamilton. She was a lovely, lovely child. She was about 18, and she was helping Mary Pyle with the English correspondence. So I told Penny about this Mass that was going to happen. So why don't you receive communion with me? So Penny did. And that's fine. After his Mass, we were outside the church, and I said, Penny, why don't we get those people together for breakfast for Father? Because he's a newly ordained priest, and we should get his blessing. Oh, she thought this was a great idea. So we rounded up about 25 people, and we all shoved the tables together and whatever. So partway through the breakfast, I got up and banged on the crystal. And I said, Father's a new priest, you know, and I think after breakfast we'll go in the salon and kneel down, and Father will give us his blessing. And that's very important. Like, we can get a lot of graces, you know. And of course, Father was all smiles. He was delighted to do this. So I don't know if you know this, but in Europe it's very formal. I mean, the priest extends his hands to your face. You kiss his hands. He puts his hand on your head. It's a bit of a ritual. So we all lined up. We were on our knees. And I'd met this lady from the Bronx before, and she had come up to me out in front of the church a few days before, and she said, I can't work. There's something wrong with my back. I got to see Padre Pio. He's got to help me to get to work. So I said, well, I mean, tell Father Guardian all about this, and he'll probably tell Padre Pio. So she's kneeling beside me, So down comes this Father Pack, and he gets to this lady, and she says, oh, Father, you got cologne on your hands. Wow, this perfume was coming from this priest like you wouldn't believe. And it was the very perfume. See, when I went there the first time, I didn't know anything about this perfume phenomenon that came from Padre Pio's wounds. And I certainly experienced it, and I was overwhelmed. In fact, I went back to the hotel, and I had perfume in my suitcase, which I hadn't worn going there, because I thought, this is a holy place. Why do I need to put on perfume? So I just took the stuff and threw it down the sink. And I thought, I'll never, never wear perfume again. I haven't. I kept a promise all these years. Not even any scented soap or anything in my house. But anyway, I was totally unprepared for this. It was the same perfume that came from Padre Pio's wounds. So as he goes further down the line, there's all these little squeals from these people. Oh, Father, you know. I guess more people were smelling it more strongly. He gets to the end. And afterwards, he came to me, and we all got up off our knees. And he came to me and he says, I don't know what's going on here. He says, I don't smell anything. And I don't know why I said this to him, but I said, well, Father, you've been ordained a priest. I said, think about that. I mean, your role is to console, not to be consoled. It's for us to be consoled, not you. So he kind of gave me this little grin, and he called me into a corner. He says, Anne, I got to tell you something. I told you yesterday that I'm a convert from the Anglicans, like in America you'd call them Episcopalians. And he said, my parents threw me out. I was a cook's tour guide in London. And when they found out I was a Catholic, or had taken instructions, they threw me out. So he said, when I got ordained, it's the family that gives you the chalice. And I came here, I did not have a chalice. I was going to have to rely on Father Guardian. You know, go in before Mass and see if you got a spare chalice, because I'd promised you that Mass, and indeed I was to say a Mass every day, of course, as a priest. So he said, I couldn't find Father Guardian. I'm standing in the sacristy alone, bewildered, and Padre Pio came off the altar, supported by these two monks. There was always one on either side of him because of his wounded feet. And Padre Pio came right over to Father Pack, gave him the most beautiful smile, and handed him his chalice. So Father Pack had said that Mass with Padre Pio's chalice. So I joked with him for the next few days, and I said, look, if you ever become a parish priest and they put PP after your name, it's going to mean perfumed priest. That's what it's going to mean. Everybody laughed about this. And I've recently been in touch with Father Pack. He's in England, of course. And you know where they posted him? He told me the day I left what happened. They posted him to the Catholic Church across the street from his parents' home. So you see, God let him down there for some reason, because he really needed the strength to hold up under those conditions. Recently he told me that he received both his parents into the Catholic Church and assisted at their deaths. But when he was going to be leaving, you know, and I saw that, and I thought, oh, well, I was having to go back to Germany because I had this teaching contract. I would love to have just stayed there, you know. And I thought, he can't leave now. So I went over to the concierge and I said, look, I think Father Pack is thinking of leaving. And the concierge said to me, well, yes, he's going to go today. So I said, well, look, I gave him some money, and I said, I want to pay for another week or 2 weeks or whatever for him. And I'll leave a little extra money if he wants books or something. If you need any more, this is where I am on this Air Force base. Call me and I'll look after it. So I knew I had to tell him because he would have left. You know? So I went over and I told him, oh, I can't accept that. Oh, no, I can't accept that. I said, why don't you let me give you an ordination present? My brother had been ordained 3 years before. And when I found out, I asked him what he wanted. I shouldn't have. I wanted to give him nice vestments. And he looked at the floor and he said, well, there was this other priest, and his sister gave him golf clubs like this. And I thought, golf clubs, good grief. So I told him this. I said, I didn't get a chance to give a really, you know, spiritual gift to my dear brother. So please, let me give this to you as an ordination present, belated somewhat. So he accepted it on that basis. Well, I lost track of Father Pack. I'm beating up this microphone. I lost track of Father Pack. And then I had heard this little story. There's the booklet is here. It's a little boy called Brian who was, it looks like this. I'll show you. There's his picture. Who lived in Liverpool, and he was a little boy that was, his parents were Anglicans, and it was discovered when he was 2 years old that he had leukemia. And these people appealed to Catholics because they had respect for their prayers. And he was getting worse and worse and worse. And what other prayers can we say? And they said, we'll say the Lord's Prayer. And they weren't into prayer. That was the point. And then some Catholics taught the parents the Hail Mary. He's still getting worse. So who else can we pray to? So this lady said, pray to Padre Pio. When he had died in 1968. This was 1970. Well, the strangest thing began to happen. The little boy wasn't getting better, but he started talking about the man who came to see him. And his mother thought, oh, well, that's your daddy coming to see you. Well, no, it wasn't his daddy. Well, what does this man look like? Well, he has a long brown dress on, and he's got holes in his hands and his feet. And around that time, the house was filled with this wonderful, wonderful perfume. So anyway, his name was Brian, and this little fellow began quoting the Catholic religion to the point where it was so astounding. Padre Pio had come back from the dead, and he was teaching this child the Catholic Catechism as it was before, or almost straight out of the Council of Trent Catechism, which is a bit advanced for a 3-year-old, but still. There he was, expositing all these truths, and amazing people. So a Catholic priest who was a friend of the seminarian from whom I got the story wanted to see him, and the family wasn't too happy to receive a priest. But anyway, he went over, he saw the child, and he said, after, I believe that little boy is seeing Padre Pio. So anyway, I got permission to print the story. And it's gone through, 17 printings. There are thousands of these books out there because the story is so beautiful. See, I didn't write the story. I wrote about it because it's a true story, you see. And this is where I want to mention this, because I got a letter early in the game. This was printed first in 1973. It was sometime in 74. I got a letter from a man in the United States, and he had written to say that he had found this booklet on a bus in Montana. And he said, I never heard of this man, Padre Pio. I want to know where I can learn more about him. I'm an Episcopal priest, like we'd say in Canada, an Anglican minister. So I wrote him a little letter back, and I told him to go to the public library. I listed a few books that he could look up, and that was fine. I filed his letter, I filed my reply, and I went on with my work. It was a couple of months later, I get another letter. And he says, Dear Mrs. Cillis, he said, I have read everything I could get my hands on Padre Pio, and I want your prayers for next Thursday. And he gave the date, and it was the following Thursday. I got this letter on a Monday, just in time to say a few prayers. And he said, I read these books on Padre Pio, and I find I can no longer stay outside the Roman Church. I am seeing my bishop next Thursday, and I'm taking half my congregation with me. And that was little Brian sitting on a bus in Montana. Well, in 78, I decided to go over because what I wanted to do, I never really got around to doing it, but what I wanted to do was write another little version, adding on maybe a few details that I didn't have in this booklet. And of course, I learned a lot. I went to see his mother. And in preparation for that, you see the picture that's on the front was a black and white picture. His mother sent me several from the album when she granted permission for the telling of the story. And I thought this one was so sweet. Now, he was only 3 when he died. He would have been 4. He died in February of 71, and he would have been 4 in April. Now, I had this picture. When I was going over there and I was going to meet his mother, I had my photographer who took my children's pictures shoot it again, you see, and his wife did photo oil coloring. That's a photo oil colored picture. And by the way, that's among the free things on the table over there. Anyone could take one. I hope you will. I hope I brought enough of them. But anyway, he called me after his wife had completed the face and the hair. And he said, we've got that all right from the little colored snap that you gave us from, he was taken out in his garden the summer before he died. But that shirt he's wearing in this picture it's striped. So he said, we don't know the color of the stripes. So what do you know about this? Well, I said, Mr. Brown, you're not a Catholic, but I'll tell you this. The colors of the Blessed Virgin Mary are pale blue and white. Why don't you make them those colors? This little fellow was devoted to the Blessed Virgin. So that's what he did, as you can see the picture, okay? So the one I had done for his mother was 11 by 17, and I had a white provincial frame put on it, wrapped it all up. And when I was in their home, my daughter Christina was with me that time. She was only 8 years old, and she played with Brian's teddy bear, and we went to see Brian's grave. Anyway, the mother sat down, and she opened the parcel. And she said, oh, he's going to speak to you. It's so like him. And how did you know the color of his little shirt? I said I didn't know. But he loved Our Lady, and I asked the person doing the coloring to do it in her colors. You see. But anyway, that's the story of little Brian. And The Italian embassy in Ottawa wanted it put into Italian, so they paid for the Italian version. I brought some in case people have Italian friends. You might want some of them. But anyway, they paid for those, and for the first 10,000 copies in Italian. And little Brian has been the subject of, I can't tell you the number of letters we still get from people who want to hear about him. And well, I always send him over to play with my grandchildren, and I have other friends with lots and lots of grandchildren. I have 9 as of this past week. And I have a friend with a daughter that's expecting her 11th child, and she's into grandchildren like you wouldn't believe. And she says, when that Tommy acts up, I send Brian over there. And I said, well, does he improve? Oh, yes. She said, yesterday he sat and never said a word. And I said, well, I guess Brian must have muzzled him or something. But this story is a very beautiful and poignant story, and it's there, available if you'd like to have it. There's just a couple of other things I wanted to mention here. You see, I get out of the prison and go nuts, you know. I mean, I've been there in this convalescent place for the last 5 months, and this is my first trip up and back. Come Tuesday night, I'm going to be back there again, so you'll have to forgive me if I'm going a little wild up here and taking advantage of my freedom. I want to tell you another little thing here. My husband and I at one time had a newspaper called the Canadian Layman. Now this is the edition we put out on Padre Pio. Now there were 2 ladies in California, and any of you that are into publishing may have remembered the Benziger sisters. Now they were not sisters, they were cousins. But they wanted to restore the Benziger name because the Benzigers, who were the printers to the Holy See, were bought by liberals and the plates were destroyed. I don't know if you knew that, just so nobody could have any of these old books. So they wanted to make up for that. Well, when they began to be our subscribers, they were always sending us subscriptions. And of course, the Padre Pio issue, they wanted to have quite a few copies, and they had a friend in India that they sent it to. Now, this is what the front page looks like in this old edition. It's from 1974, and it's falling apart. But anyway, there's the picture on the front. Black and white picture, Padre Pio. So one night, I got a call from Los Angeles, and it was Marilee Benziger, and she was jumping up and down. She was so excited. She says, I've got to tell you this. She says, I've just had a call from India, and in those days they had to book a cable. It wasn't like pressing a button today. And their friend, who was a priest, had gone to the hospital where his friend was going to have both legs amputated in the morning. And this priest sat, the man could speak English, and he read this edition from cover to cover to the man. And while he was reading it, this perfume began to come from the page, any of the pages from the paper. And she said, I'm so excited because when the doctors came in to take him to the OR, they didn't have to amputate his legs. And this is Padre Pio again. So you see, there's many, many more miracles that he has obtained. And one story I just love is this lady who was blind. I think she was born blind. But anyway, she went to him and she knelt at his feet and she wanted her sight. And she said, I'd be happy just to have the sight of one eye, Padre. Please obtain this for me. He was furious with her. He put his hands under her elbows and he brings her up to her feet. And he says, Madam, he says, how dare you insult God like that? And she says, insult him? And he says, you're asking for a half-baked miracle. And he doesn't give half-baked miracles. You ask him for the sight of both eyes, and you get into that church and kneel down in there, and that's what you're going to ask for, and don't come back and see me until you can see. The woman went in and comes out with 20/20 vision and falls at his feet again. He put his arms around her. He said, if I sounded nasty, it was to make sure you went into that church. And that was what he was like. Well, I could stay here all night telling you these stories, and I don't know if I have met the demand of the title I was given, but he is a traditionalist hero, and I am saying that that picture is very significant, and it's a picture that's been suppressed, And I'd hate to tell you how from my convalescent hospital room I'm wheeling and dealing with a newspaper in Milan where they don't speak English. I'm calling a friend in Rome who speaks both languages, and it turns out does not appreciate Archbishop Lefebvre. I said, I've got to get this photo. I want it. I probably have it in my archives, but I've got 70 boxes that need to be sorted, and I don't know where it is. So finally they got it for me, and I had it blown up, because I think it's a very significant picture. And please remember that Padre Pio never said the new Mass. And if you have anyone telling you this, just be nice to them and say, well, we know otherwise. There's no way that he said the new Mass. It wasn't promulgated officially till the year after he died. But in that paper in Milan, they had written an article that Archbishop Lefebvre and Padre Pio said the same Mass. See? Only the thrust of the article was this. The Vatican persecuted Padre Pio. He died under an interdict, you know. He couldn't preach and he couldn't write letters. That was never lifted. So they said they've persecuted him. Now they want to beatify him tomorrow. Is Lefebvre far behind? They've excommunicated him. Are they going to beatify him next year? You know, that was the thrust of the article. But when I heard that they had the picture, finally it was sent by courier, and all the nurses in the convalescent place, have you got the picture you're after? You know, this, I guess I'm the only one in there that was phoning Milan and raising the dickens with these people to get this picture. And then they all wanted to see it. So our priest who says the Tridentine Mass in our parish is now coming out. I've arranged just recently that he's going to come every week. We have there's 170 permanent residents in this place. It's a retirement lodge that takes convalescent people, and I'm one of 12 of those. And so there's several people who remember the old Mass, who are elderly. They couldn't believe they used to see the priest coming in his priestly garb to bring me Holy Communion. One of the fraternity priests, our pastor, Father Ryan, and who's now been transferred to Scranton. He's the rector of the new seminary. And this other older priest has now come. So the older priest, a lovely man, close to 70, is going to come and say Mass for these people once a week out there. And it will be the Tridentine Mass, so some of these older people can pick up on that a little bit, and it's a cause for rejoicing. I got so much material here, and I've got to call it quits. But I just want to tell you how happy I am to come down here. It's a real shot in the arm, because you come down and meet up with people of like mind, and it just makes you realize that we're all in this battle, but don't give up. God is in charge. He's going to solve this for us. We have to keep our faith. Thank you so much. I appreciate being invited.